We are live. Coming to you live is Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, hello. Sorry we missed last week, but I was doing good work. I was testifying in a civil rights case down in Florida. Otherwise, I would never miss being with all of you.
Exactly. Well, we've missed quite a bit. The big news is that the Arizona Supreme Court has ruled an abortion ban. We also have the Trump trial coming up. We also have Mike Johnson and House Republicans in turmoil. I don't know if you saw the video, but yesterday I think Kevin McCarthy said he was ousted because somebody in the GOP was being investigated for sleeping with a 17-year-old. Did you see that video?
No.
You didn't see
Do we
that?
know who it was?
Who do you think?
Matt Gaetz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't see that video?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Actually, as soon as I came back from Florida, I got sick.
Oh no, I also had the flu on our birthday, which was
on our birthdays. Well, I was in Florida for my birthday. They actually had a little ceremony for me, so it was very nice.
Nice. Where do you want to start today, Dad?
Let's start with Arizona, and we're going to start with a quiz. We'll start with an easy one. What was going on in 1864?
The Civil War.
The Civil War. So the Arizona Supreme Court has reached back to the Civil War era, before the abolition of slavery, right? When the Union was still divided, to resurrect a law controlling the reproductive lives of women in Arizona. But of course, that's not all. How many people were in Arizona in 1864?
600,000.
Like 1% of that.
Really?
6,500 people, approximately.
Oh my God! In the entire state of Arizona?
6,500, almost all of them men, because, in those Western settlements, women only came later when things were established. Was Arizona a state in 1864?
No.
When did it become a state?
In 1892.
You're not even close. 1912.
Oh.
So like almost 60 years, like 50 years later.
I have to give a guess. What am I going to do? I have to give a guess.
You're not an Arizona expert, huh? All right. So we had 6,500 people, almost all of them men, decades before it became a state. How many women voted in Arizona in 1864? Zero. There were hardly any women there, and none of them voted. And so the state legislature that passed this law was voted in entirely by men. And how many non-white men do you think are on the state legislature? Zero. And you know how big the state legislature was?
In 1912 or when?
In 1864.
1864. 7?
Well, it was a little bigger than that. It was like 27.
Okay.
So 27 white men in a territory of 6,500 people, almost all men, no voting women. Now, do you know who the Speaker of the House was, the guy who was directing all this?
Of course.
W. Claude Jones.
W. Claude Jones. He was known for his polo expertise.
Yes. Serially raping young girls.
Jesus.
Anywhere from 12 to 15 years old, repeatedly, not just once, not just twice. He was known for this, and he had done it several times. So this is the guy who's leading this 1864 law that the Arizona Supreme Court has now foisted upon the people of Arizona.
I didn't know that. I wasn't trying to make light of that. I actually didn't know when I said polo.
Oh, okay.
I really didn't know.
So you didn't know he was a serial rapist of young girls.
No.
Yeah. And of course, back in those days, there were no consequences for men doing that kind of thing because men controlled everything. Women didn't vote. In many states, they couldn't even hold property. control their own wages. And none of this, by the way, what the Arizona Supreme Court did was an accident. You see Republicans tumbling over one another to distance themselves from this Arizona decision. Do you think they're doing that because they thought the decision was too extreme?
No.
Was there another reason why they're trying to distance themselves?
Because of the election? I don't know.
Yeah, because it's way unpopular. This ruling, may well turn Arizona to the Democrats. There's a big Senate election there, and it's a huge swing state in the presidential election. And certainly this decision is not going to help Republicans. And of course, they're lying about it. You know who Carrie Lake is?
I do.
All right. She's the crazy Trumper election denier who is likely to be the Republican nominee for Senate to challenge the Democrat Ruben Gallego. And before this decision, she was talking about controlling abortion, and she specifically referenced the 1864 law and said it was a really good law. Now she's turned tail and running as fast as she can away from the law, totally ignoring or denying what she had said before. But you can run and you can hide, but eventually the truth is going to catch up with you. And this decision, along with the decision in the Alabama Supreme Court saying frozen embryos are really babies, and essentially, if that held, shutting down in vitro fertilization entirely, these decisions are going to reverberate, not just in those states, but in elections all over the country. And you heard Donald Trump backtrack. First he talked about a national 15-week abortion ban. Now he's saying, we should leave it up to the states. And he's saying, the states are doing a great job. They're handling it right. Donald Trump thinks he can talk his way out of anything, but it doesn't work that way. Now, the bigger picture, resurrecting an 1864 law, you may think is an aberration. It's an accident. No, it is entirely consistent with the jurisprudence of the U.S. Supreme Court that led to the overturning of Roe. In his majority opinion, Alito said there's no right in the Constitution that's not deeply rooted in the American traditions. So to interpret the Constitution, you have to look at the American tradition. And what's the American tradition if you go back 170 years of slavery, 250 years of discrimination against African Americans, slavery followed by Jim Crow, no women voting, or at least not voting nationally overall. Some women did vote, but nationally women couldn't vote until 1920. Yeah, so you go back, to early America and you have racism and patriarchy. And those are the traditions that we should be following. And what the Arizona Supreme Court did was absolutely consistent with Samuel Alito's jurisprudence, which says we should be guided by these deep American traditions, even from the time of slavery. Moreover, as always, this notion of deep tradition runs only in one direction. Do you remember the famous decision, Citizens United? Does that ring a bell with you?
Yes.
Back in 2010, basically saying two things. Corporations are persons. They have the rights of persons, and speech is money. Therefore, you cannot regulate the ability of corporations to spend as much money, unregulated money, as they want on elections. And after that, corporate spending on elections just boomed. You tell me where in the American tradition is established the idea that dollars equals money. Nowhere are you going to find that. And not until late in the 19th century are you going to find any notion that corporations are persons. And so this kind of jurisprudence based on deep traditions, works for conservatives to read their politics into the Constitution, but it's just as readily abandoned when it serves their political purposes. Same thing with the decision, the Heller decision in 2008, for the first time establishing an individual right to keep and bear arms. That decision had nothing to do with the actual debates and discussions in the adoption of the Second Amendment. Not a single person involved in drafting, voting for, or ratifying the Second Amendment ever said it did anything but establish a well-regulated militia. No one said it established an individual right to keep and bear arms. And in fact, it was drafted by Southerners, slaveholders, voted for by slaveholders. They would not for a moment have voted for an amendment to give an individual right to bear arms because it would have armed Black people. But by tying it to the militia, they protected things because Black people were barred from the militia. So none of this is accidental. It's all systematic. Now, the other big thing you mentioned was the Trump trial, right?
Yes, I did mention that.
You did, and you're very smart. I mean, you picked right up on that. I'm very proud of you.
What?
Trial scheduled for Monday, just a few days from now. No, Trump has been, kind of a miracle man and pulling off a Houdini move in the 11th hour and 59th minute. I don't think it's going to happen this time. I don't think either this judge or the New York State Appeals Court is going to listen to any more of Trump's nonsense. He's filed 11 appeals to try to delay. Yes, 11. It's an all-time record, I would imagine, to try to delay or move the trial. They all got shot down. The most recent got shot down within an hour. The appeals court judges didn't even take any time to deliberate, didn't even have to write anything. They just denied it right on the spot. And unfortunately, the media is still downplaying this trial. One of my good buddies is Wolf Blitzer. I'm a big Wolf Blitzer fan, right?
Wolf,
my guy. I couldn't believe it. 3 days before the trial. This guy's almost as old as me, pretty much. He's been around forever. He should know better. What did he call it, Sam?
I don't know.
The hush money trial.
Oh, right.
It's not a hush money trial. I don't know how many times I have to shout this. Donald Trump is not on trial for paying hush money. As morally reprehensible as that is, it's not a crime. It's an election fraud trial, much like his other trials. He is on trial for concealing the payment of hush money from the American people and government regulators by disguising it as though it were a business expense, something for which Michael Cohen, he's a, believe it or not, an AU alum, but I don't think he was in any of my classes. Michael Cohen's already gone to jail for this very thing. And if you believe Michael Cohen was orchestrating this all on his own without Donald Trump, I got a really big bridge in my hometown of Brooklyn to sell to you. Come on. I don't know what Donald Trump's defense is going to be. I've heard rumors he's going to claim he did this not to deceive the electorate, but to protect Melania. This is a guy who's bragged on television about grabbing women by their private parts, who bragged while his wife was pregnant about chasing a married woman to try to have sex with her. Do you think that he's the stingiest man in the world is going to pay $130,000 to protect Melania? Plus, who has to go on the stand to make that claim?
DJT.
Yes, and how is he done when he's gotten on the stand under oath?
Not very good.
Yes, and so I don't know what his defense. I guess maybe some technical defense about the law. That's always possible. And the one guy he might have called to defend him, this Allan Weisselberg, right? Not you.
Oh.
You know who Allan Weisselberg is?
Unfortunately.
Yes, the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, for like 20 years in the Trump.
I thought who I thought you were talking about? I thought you were talking about There's another Allen who defends him all the time. Who's that? He's like a Harvard law guy.
Oh, I think you're talking about Dershowitz.
Dershowitz. I was thinking
Yes.
Dershowitz in my head. That's not
No,
who we're
no.
talking about. Okay.
I don't think he might bring on Dershowitz to make some bogus legal argument, but we're talking about Weisselberg. He'll lie blatantly to protect Trump. But you know what happened to Weisselberg just yesterday?
No idea. I haven't been following the news at all.
Sent to prison for lying.
Oh,
For committing perjury in the New York State real estate fraud case. So I don't think, pulling him out of Rikers Island and bringing a convicted perjurer to the stand is going to be extremely helpful to Donald Trump. So I have no idea what their defense is going to be. But, I have very little faith, as you've heard me say many times, in these prosecutors who sat on their tails for 7 years before bringing this case and now want to take 4 to 6 weeks to bore a jury to death on what is an absolutely open and shut case. You don't even need any witnesses. It can all be tried in the documents. I'm not saying they should do that because you want to, create some verisimilitude with real live persons. But is there any dispute that he paid her the hush money?
no.
No, he even admits that. And then we have the checks, right? We had the checks from the trial of Michael Cohen. Who signed the checks and listed them as business expenses?
Donald J. Trump.
Right. What else do you need? It's an open and shut case. Again, I can't speak to any of the technicalities, but there's no dispute about the facts of the case. And as I said, short of putting Donald Trump on the stand, which is probably legal suicide, I have no idea what their defense is going to be. So, we have the perfect storm for Trump. On the one hand, we have these outrageous state Supreme Court decisions, which are outrageous to most Americans, but absolutely consistent with what conservatives have been doing over the past 20 years. Then we have Trump finally facing the music coming up on trial. And by the way, finally, at the 11th hour and 55th minute, finally, some of the mainstream media is coming around to what you and I have been saying for months, that this trial is significant. It's not irrelevant. It's not a runt trial.
I said that?
Yeah, of course you said that.
Okay. I'll take
Or at
it.
least you agreed with me when I said that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Anything else you want to add, or do you want to get to some questions?
I think it's time to get to some questions. What do you think? I mean, I can go on forever, but let's
Right.
get to some questions.
I agree with you. Let's get to some questions.
And remember, we need members, we need donations, we need subscribers. Keep us on the air. We're operating on a shoestring.
Barry Smith, member Barry Smith says, in 1992 interview on C-SPAN, you explained that although the economy was not in a recession, it was bad enough to call a false key for George Bush. Is the current economy in the same situation or no?
Not even close. I'm very amazed. People have dredged up my interviews from 32 years ago.
I was born in 1992.
Yeah, frankly, the EU won't remember anything. But when you read my book, you'll see it's much more nuanced than that, obviously. Number one, the National Bureau of Economic Research, which I rely on, not solely, but rely on definitively, had declared a recession. And they did not declare the recession over until several weeks after the election. So technically, unlike today, we were in a recession, and the vast majority of Americans agreed that we were in a recession. So it was the confluence of those two events, neither of which applied today.
Captain M90 says, do you think Biden might reform the Supreme Court in his second term and achieve a policy change again?
It's kind of interesting. Conservatives have been screaming, you can't touch the court, it's sacred, it's independent. You know how you got this big conservative majority on the Arizona Supreme Court? The Republicans expanded the court so the Republican governor could make more conservative appointments. But now, of course, conservatives are on their high horse. And by the way, is a requirement for a 9-member Supreme Court in the Constitution, Sam?
No.
No, it's by statute. And it's not always been 9. So absolutely you could change the membership of the court. The problem is it's never going to get through Congress because it would take 60 votes in the Senate, and that certainly is not going to happen. So I think barring deaths or resignations, the court you see is the court you're going to get.
Hamlet with a $10 donation. They say there was a claim that Judge Cannon would schedule pretrial hearings to purposefully interfere with the New York criminal case in order to stop that trial from happening. Is that a possibility?
I think that's maybe a little too Machiavellian. I'm not sure she has the ability to play 3-dimensional chess like that. I think the simpler explanation is she doesn't want or is reluctant to have, and again, it's not a documents case. It's not like, you haven't returned your library book. It's a national security case. He's not being charged under the Presidential Records Act. That's not a criminal statute. What's he being charged under, Sam?
Espionage.
The Espionage Act, a very, very serious crime. You got it, with very serious penalties. And she seems very reluctant to see this case go to trial. And by the way, everyone's trying to complicate this case. Forget it. It's another dead simple case. He took the documents. Didn't matter whether he declassified them or not. Was there a declassification system in place when the Espionage Act was passed, Sam?
I'm assuming the answer is no.
You got it right. So, whether he declassified them, irrelevant. He had no right to take them. He then lied about them, defied a subpoena, concealed them, moved them, obstructed justice, open and shut. Again, I don't know what his defense possibly could be. And, Judge Canada's complicated it, by, making it about these national security documents. But you know what? Does it matter what's in those documents, Sam?
No.
No. As long as they're national security documents, that's what the law says. Whether they're about plans to attack Iran, nuclear capabilities, the Israeli armed forces, the location of American agents, none of that matters. All that matters is they are under the Espionage Act, they are national security documents. And, folks have been tried and convicted under the Espionage Act for things far less serious than what Trump is being charged with.
But can't he just declassify things with his mind?
Oh, yeah, he can do anything, it's the Vulcan mind meld, I'm sure.
Ooh. President Scrooge asks, with the new...
one of our presidents.
Yes. With the new inflation numbers being high, how worried are you about the short-term economy?
It makes me a little bit more worried. Again, I don't need to repeat my Jack German story.
No,
right?
no.
Economists are divided. It's getting pretty late in the year for a recession, to emerge before the election. But those numbers were not especially good news.
Real American 73 asks, RFK is only rated in double digits by low-rated pollsters. All the highly rated pollsters I've seen in the last 2 weeks have him at 8% or lower. Is it safe to tilt this key in Biden's favor, or is it still a pure toss-up?
Let me say this. I don't want to get, I hate to do hypotheticals because everyone will jump on anything I say. It's still undecided. It's still too early. And the polls have been all over the place. But certainly at this point, it does not tilt in favor of turning the keys. At best or at worst for Biden, it's a toss-up.
We have 323 people watching, Dad. That might be our record.
That's awesome.
For us. But we only have 90 likes. Come on, give us some likes, people.
Give us some donations and memberships.
Oh, right.
We don't stay in the air because of likes.
Our good friend Andrew asked, First quarter GDP is projected to grow about 3%. This kind of growth makes recession before November highly unlikely, if not impossible. Will you call the economic keys for Biden if that data is confirmed?
No, I don't call, I'm not going to call the keys when there's still a possibility that the key will turn. That's, I understand it's remote. That's why I prefer to say, as always, I'll be making my final prediction around August, when a lot of what's now a bit uncertain will be falling into place.
Member Sean P. says, do you think Senator Susan Collins will be reelected if she runs again in spite of being the deciding vote for Kavanaugh, who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade?
Well, she got reelected already after, I believe, casting that deciding vote. She seems to have a very strong grip on the electorate in her state. But she's I'm not going to call her old because I think I'm older, but she is getting on in years. And, she may decide not to run again. That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, but she was reelected. She was reelected before the Roe decision.
Was it before the vote? You sure?
No.
I thought it was right after. Pretty sure it was right after, but I'm not positive. Okay. I'm not positive. I don't follow her elections that closely. But as I said, I'm not sure how old she is, around 70, I would guess. So, she may not seek another term, which would open up that seat for the Democrats.
The Alex Treefire asked, do you think Gallego has it in the bag now in Arizona?
Well, the great Benjamin Disraeli, the Jewish prime minister, multiple prime minister of England, once said, finality is not a word we use in politics. I would modify that by saying finality is not a word we use until the keys are called. But the keys don't apply to Senate elections. So I would say two things. One, this recent decision makes it highly likely that Gallego wins. I'm not, I never say never, but I think it's highly likely, and makes it much more likely that Arizona goes for Biden. Arizona, for the first time in a long time, went for a Democrat in 2020, and, was very much of a toss-up state. Now I would say the state certainly leans Biden. And if Biden wins Arizona, that really narrows Trump's path to an electoral college majority, because there aren't that many other swing states. And again, I don't go by the polls, but, I've been yelling for months to Democrats, don't panic over these early polls. They're going to change. They don't mean anything. And I just saw a Pennsylvania poll, whatever it's worth, that completely turned around Pennsylvania. It had been polling for Trump. This poll had Biden 6 to 10 points ahead. The latest poll in Pennsylvania I've seen.
Ian Matheru asks, why did Democrats hold the House for a record 40 years from 1955 to 1999? What were the causes of the 1994 Republican Revolution?
Yeah, it was till 1994, not 1999. That's a very big question. You should come to my class to answer it, but I'll be brief as possible. Southern Democrats. There were enough Southern Democrats, even though they were out of step ideologically with Northern Democrats, who didn't break with their party. These are the so-called ball weevils who joined with Republicans to pass Ronald Reagan's economic program. You're absolutely right. The election of 1994 was a watershed election that broke the dam for Republicans in the South. For the first time, Republicans were gaining a majority of U.S. House and U.S. Senate seats in the House, and the South was making the transformation from the most solidly Democratic region of the country to the most solidly Republican region of the country. The midterm election of 1994 was arguably the most significant midterm election in the modern history of the United States. So kudos to our listener or watcher for picking up on that.
They could be listening or watching, or they could be doing both. Wait, Dad, hold up your soda for a second. I want everybody to see this. This man, no, bring it back. This man,
No,
this man drinks a soda that still has all the plastic still attached to it from the other bottles.
plastic is on the outside. It doesn't affect the soda. Here, how about this one?
No, bring the other one back. I want to see that one
No,
again.
no. All right.
No, more in the frame, in the center. Look at this guy. This guy is ridiculous.
You're making fun of me.
Yes. All right.
I'm going to tell your mother.
She's watching.
Oh, so she knows.
You don't need to tell
You're in
her. She
trouble.
knows. Mike DeNicola asks, "Hey, Professor," I can't get over that plastic. Hey, Professor.
Oh, quiet.
Hey, Professor. I was wondering if you think if no ceasefire is achieved in Gaza, that there could be unrest at the Democrats' convention, which could flip the no social unrest key.
You know, I don't like to answer hypotheticals. I think that's a very unlikely scenario. There might be some sporadic protests, but I'd be very surprised because social unrest is a high threshold key. There are always sporadic protests, but I'd be very surprised to see anything rise to a sufficient level to turn that key. It's not going to be 1968 all over again.
With a guaranteed flip of Manchin's seat to the Republicans and your previous prediction that John Tester and Sherrod Brown survive re-election, are you thinking the U.S. Senate will be 50-50 again?
Could well be, but here's the great irony of this year's Senate elections. For the first time in recent history, it could come down to a very unexpected state. Do you know what that state is, Sam? That suddenly got into play in the last month.
Let me think.
State you know well.
Maryland.
Maryland. And why did that get into play all of a sudden?
Because of our former governor, Larry Hogan.
Larry Hogan, very popular former governor, suddenly decided that he was going to run for Senate and will certainly get the nomination and will be a formidable candidate. Again, the early polls don't mean much, but he was beating the Democrats in some of the early polls. And the state of Maryland has not elected a Republican, I think, since Mac Mathias about 40 years ago.
When do you think the New York trial will reach a verdict?
I hope much more quickly than predicted. People are talking about 6 to 8 weeks for a verdict. I would hope it would be 2 to 3 weeks for a verdict. You heard me scream that the prosecutors should cut way down on their case, but they never listened to me, so I'd say 6 to 8 weeks.
Thank you, Pamela Gonzalez, for the gifted membership. Unfortunately, it seemed to have gone to a troll, but you can't control that. Blake Grisham asked...
You can't control the trolls?
Well, to some extent.
Okay.
Blake Grisham asks, I think Biden can still win enough keys, even without the foreign policy keys. Do you see Ukraine aid passing in spite of Johnson's games, and do you see Bibi being voted out? If so, that can help Biden with the keys, ?
I do think Ukraine aid will pass. There's just, fairly substantial majority support for it, even in the House. Although a few, again, the mainstream media is so off base. Folks like Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene are not conservatives. Yes, in a sense, they're conservative in their policies, but they're radical extremists. They're way out of step with, the legitimate bounds of conservative versus liberal debates. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she believes in this QAnon nonsense. She's talked about Jews installing space lasers out there, somewhere in the Ethereum to attack the United States. Just think about that. She's claimed the Democratic Party is a gang of sex trafficking pedophiles. And there she is on national television given a forum. Might as well resurrect Mussolini and give him a forum. There's no difference between them. It just astounds me how utterly clueless the mainstream media has been and how they play right into the hands of Donald Trump and his far out extremist followers. But despite all that, I do think Ukraine aid will pass. You've heard me say this before. Biden is just so unlucky to be saddled with Netanyahu, who he never supported. Netanyahu was pushed by Trump and Trump's allies. He's the Donald Trump of Israel, the worst possible person to have in charge during this incredibly difficult, tense time. But I don't see him being voted out anytime soon because it's very difficult to have an election in the middle of a war.
Thank you, Carpe Diem 56, for the donation.
Nice.
With the abortion referendum in Florida, does that mean that Florida is back in play as a swing state for the Democrats?
Be very difficult for the Democrats to win Florida. It's been moving in the other direction from being at least something of a swing state to being a more solidly red state. But if anything can shake it up, it is an abortion referendum. And unless the Arizona Supreme Court somehow swoops in and denies the right to put a pro-choice amendment on the ballot in Arizona, it's going on the ballot in Arizona as well. And that's going to give additional momentum to the pro-choice forces stirred up by the Supreme Court decision.
One of our members, Theo Meal, wants to know what your grade would be for George H.W. Bush.
Give him a B.
Dijin Dareen with a $2 donation with a spicy question. You can skip if you want. Is Israel...
I'm a spicy guy.
This is a little... not that kind of spicy. Is Israel an apartheid state?
I'm not going to answer that.
Skip it.
I'm not jumping into that controversy. Oh, my God.
James Lagruta asks, is closing the gun show loophole another policy change achievement for Biden?
Absolutely. Those who believe in reasonable gun control have been clamoring for this for many years, almost decades, and it has overwhelming popular support. So absolutely yes, but the right wing is going to challenge it in court. It's going to get up to the Supreme Court, and its fate is going to be undetermined. That's why I wrote a book on gun control and gun violence called Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America, because as long as you have the Second Amendment and you've got this Heller decision establishing an individual right to keep and bear arms, courts could strike down any state or national initiative on gun control, including closing the gun show loophole. So this is going to court, and its fate is very uncertain. And they'll probably file it in Amarillo. Right. What's special about Amarillo, Sam?
I don't know.
It's got the most conservative judge pretty much in America. And he's the only judge in Amarillo. So if you file in Amarillo, you're going to get this judge. He's the judge who struck down the abortion pill. Even a more extreme decision than the very conservative Fifth Circuit.
Thank you, Austin Lee, for becoming a member. Captain M90s asks, there are growing calls from DEMS to abolish the filibuster to advance voting rights and expansion of the court. What are your thoughts?
I've been in favor of abolishing the filibuster a long time ago. The filibuster is not one of those things that conservatives champion. Where in the law is there a filibuster, Sam?
It's not in the law.
It's not in the law. It's not in the Constitution. It's just a rule, and can easily be changed. And it would certainly open the door to lots of progressive legislation. Now, it might also open the door to a lot of repressive legislation, but that's democracy. That's the way democracy works. and I'd much rather see things decided on a democratic basis than some obsolete rule. And who first exploited the filibuster? Jim Crow segregationists.
You didn't let me answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. You knew that answer?
No, I was going to guess Mitch McConnell.
Long before Mitch McConnell. Although he was certainly the master.
Look, at least I'm an honest guy, right? I said I could have said, "Oh yeah, I knew that," but look, I didn't. That simple.
We're not going to give you a negative mark for that.
Okay, thank you.
I've got you all tallied up here.
Okay. Our new member, Austin Lee, says, you've mentioned before that the keys were made for post-Civil War elections. Why don't the keys work before then, and what sort of event would be significant enough for them to be reassessed?
Great question. Really, two questions. In principle, they could work before 1860, where I start. But you got to start somewhere. And you can't start too early because the system was entirely different. You didn't even have tickets until 1804. Before that, the highest vote getter in the Electoral College was president. The second highest was vice president.
I think we should go back to that. I think we should go back to that.
Yeah. Why don't you write an article about that?
I will. Maybe I will.
So it's a different system. The statistics get very tricky, very hard to nail down before 1860. And 1860 is the start of Republican versus Democratic competition. So rather than, make things messier, I thought I had more than enough historical scope to begin at the logical starting point of 1860. Now, there was another second half of that question. Oh, what events would be big enough to change the keys? The answer is none. You don't change the keys on the fly. You don't change any system on the fly. Now, I'm not sure I'm old. I may be too old for this to happen. If, for 2 or 3 elections, the keys misfired, then I would in fact be motivated to change them, but not just for one election.
Adam Brandt Overby says, in these dramatic times we live in, I feel like the keys will be much harder to call than usual. Short-term economy plus foreign keys being subjective, I guess.
Look, when I first developed the keys, the professional forecasters slammed me. I had considered committed the mortal sin of subjectivity. You couldn't just look at a table of numbers and answer every key. Then it took about 15 years, and there was suddenly a huge turnaround. They realized these so-called objective systems didn't work. They didn't predict anything. And that the best system combined, I don't call it subjective, I call it judgmental factors with, more cut and dried factors. And all of a sudden, the keys were the hottest thing in forecasting. I twice keynoted the International Forecasting Summit. I published in the leading forecasting journals. And so they may look subjective, but in fact, they're judgmental. When you read my book, hey, I just got the page proof, Sam, today for my new book. It's coming out in July, The Keys to the White House, 2024. But at any rate, when you read my book, you'll see 2 things. One, the keys are very carefully defined. I already talked about what triggers the recession key, and it's not just purely subjective, as we discussed. And I've answered these questions, every one of them, retrospectively going back to Abe Lincoln in 1860 and prospectively going back to Reagan in 1984. So there's a huge track record of how these keys are answered. And for the next election, however you answer them has to be consistent with how they've been answered since 1860. You can't make up a new basis for answering them. Finally, the fact that they're judgmental makes them interesting. They can be used in the classroom, and they are used in the classroom. You can't take one of those big mathematical models and use them to teach about history and politics in the classroom. The keys do that. I just published an article in Social Education, the Journal of the American Social Studies Association that goes to teachers of social studies all over the country who are using, many of whom are using the keys as a teaching device. Plus, it's the world's only do-it-yourself prediction system. Anyone can go ahead and answer these keys and come up with their own predictions.
Thank you, James H. and Alex B. for becoming members. Sean Matthew says, is it accurate to say that Black Americans were faring better before Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty as claimed by conservatives? Also, what are your thoughts on voter IDs?
That's abject nonsense. Poverty went down among African Americans, health improved, education improved. By virtually any measure, life got better for African Americans and generally for less affluent people in America. In fact, the pillars of the Great Society have become untouchable. Even conservatives are not talking about repealing Medicare or Medicaid or food stamps. You know, they have become pillars of the American policy system. And I've testified many times against voter ID. I don't think they're necessary. Maryland, what do you have to do to vote in Maryland, Sam? When you go to the polls, what do you have to show?
Nothing.
Nothing. Just got to say, I'm Sam Lichtman. Here's my address. And how many cases of voter impersonation have been convicted in Maryland?
Very little.
Virtually, I don't know of any. You know, I'm always reluctant to prove a negative, but it's either zero or very close to zero, even better than states with photo ID laws. So they're unnecessary, they're a burden, and like most burdens, they fall most heavily on minorities and poor people.
Chad Stratz says, what is the foreign policy key looking like, specifically with Palestine and Israel?
Well, I've said this many times, they're shaky. You know, if anything, they're at this point, you know, not looking good for Biden. But again, I haven't called them. A lot can happen. And where the keys stand at this moment may not be where they stand 4 months from now.
Our good friend Pierre Holmes asks, Alan, do you think the period of 1933 to 1969 is considered the golden age of the presidency from FDR to LBJ?
Well, yes and no. It's certainly considered the golden age of the presidency for liberals. You know, most of liberal reforms that endure to this day were adopted under Lyndon Johnson or Franklin Roosevelt. And again, for all of Republican criticism, almost all of those programs still stand. You know, we haven't torn down Social Security or the minimum wage, child labor laws. You know, they've been weakened a bit, but they're still pretty much standing. The insurance of bank deposits, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Medicare, Medicaid, all these things still stand. Now, the big blemish in that so-called golden age is the war in Vietnam, which was needlessly begun under Democratic President Lyndon Johnson.
Griff wants to know, Dad, if we're going to do the Where the Keys Stand this month. What do you think?
Probably early next month. Maybe early to middle May. Let's shoot for middle May. We'll have a better handle on the keys by then, because maybe the trial will be over. Let's put it this way. We will do the session on the updated keys as soon as the trial is over. Does that sound fair?
Sounds fair.
That way you'll know when it's coming.
Patrick Gibbs asks, does a vibe recession affect the short-term key?
Does a what recession?
This must be a typo. It's vibe recession.
I don't know what that is.
What could he be meaning to say?
Typo. I have no idea what a vibe recession is.
Vibe, V-I-B-E. What could they be meaning to say?
I guess what he could mean, or she, is kind of a vibe, a perceptual recession. People thinking. That's not enough. Unless it's just, you know, if 90% of Americans thought we were in a recession. I probably would turn the key. But, short of an overwhelming majority, absent any objective indicator like the National Bureau of Economic Research or 2 down quarters, I'd be reluctant to turn the key. And I haven't seen anything close to that. Yes, a lot of people are unhappy with the economy, but you don't have a substantial majority saying the economy is in recession.
Thank you, Jose Marquez, Cameron Kier, Michael Colicchio, for your donations. Some economists claim that inverted yield curves between the short-term and long-term interest rates, as we have now, indicate a coming recession. It doesn't say exactly when, though. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's like saying you're going to die, but I know you're going to die, but I don't know when you're going to die. It's meaningless unless it's got a timeline. I have seen so many times these great, financial gurus come on and say, we're going to hit a financial crisis, take your money out. Yeah, eventually we will hit a financial crisis. It always happens. And then, they'll come out and claim, see, I told you so. Those are, without timing on them, those are utterly meaningless predictions.
President Belichick, can we turn the scandal key true at this point?
Again, I'm not ready to turn it. I'd say there's, the remotest chance that Republicans can come up with something. Remotest. I'm talking about under 1%. So again, I have no need to definitively turn it at this point, but I'd be shocked if it went against Biden. Here's the thing. I've said this before. Biden's a vanilla guy. That means he doesn't win key 12, incumbent charisma. But because he's a vanilla guy, it also means he's not going to lose the scandal key.
Incumbent party is 0 for 4, then keys 10 for 11 are false. Do you get that or no?
That's possible. You're talking about the 2 foreign policy keys, both of them being false. That I'd have to go back and check, but we have a very smart audience, and I'm not going to quarrel. But I don't predict based on any individual keys.
KA asks, does inflation not have an effect on any keys? It just doesn't make sense. Also, some people think Biden's age is having a scandalous effect. Thoughts?
Yeah. Inflation could affect a key. There are those who believe that the inflation was going to drive our economy into a recession. It hasn't, but some economists believe it has that potential. Inflation can also, when other factors are present, contribute to social unrest. But I don't count anything that doesn't affect a key. If I go outside the system, then the system becomes worthless. As I said, you can't change a model on the fly. You've got to stick to the model itself. Was there a second part to that question?
Biden's age.
Oh, look, I've said this so many times. What don't I have, Sam?
A myth of hat that predicts the future or something.
Right. I don't have a crystal ball.
Oh, yeah.
I don't claim like Mike Johnson to have a pipeline to the almighty. My system's based on history. It's a very robust system because it goes back over 160 years with enormous changes in our demography, our politics, our economy. But it's always possible. Something outside the keys could be so cataclysmic to change the pattern. I don't think Biden's age is enough, but you don't know until it happens. I think, more outside the pattern is the Trump indictments. I think that's a bigger, unprecedented event than Biden's age. Remember, although he wasn't as old as Biden, age was different back in the 80s. And a lot of commentators were saying Ronald Reagan was too old to run for re-election in 1984. And there were a lot of rumors, just like there are for Biden, about his mental state. And how well did Reagan do in the 1984 election?
Pretty well.
Won, I think, every state but Minnesota. and 60% of the popular vote. Not bad.
Does the abortion issue affect the keys?
No, they do not directly affect the keys. They could affect the keys if they had emerged earlier and influence, for example, the midterm elections. But by themselves, they don't change the keys. But they certainly can change the dynamics of every election below the president. You know, a lot of people are talking about how much this helps Ruben Gallego in Arizona. So Senate elections, congressional elections, state house elections, local elections, all could be profoundly affected by the abortion issue. And what's so unique about the abortion issue is it's not abstract. You know, people like me are very worried about our democracy, but that's still a little bit abstract. But controlling women's reproductive lives, which also affect their male partners, that, you know, comes right into our homes and our bedrooms.
One of our new members, Michael Colicchio, asks, what is the possibility of ending the Electoral College?
I'd say two chances, slim and none. The Electoral College is in the Constitution. We haven't had a significant constitutional amendment since the 18-year-old vote in the 1970s. So it's been, you know, forever. We had one more, but it had to do with congressional pay. It wasn't significant. There's no way, unless something drastically changes in our politics, you're going to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress to agree, and you're certainly not going to get 3/4 of the states to agree. The small states, which benefit from the Electoral College, are never going to agree. Now, there is this movement, the Compact of the States, to get states to agree that whatever the result in their state, they will go along with and give their electoral votes to the national winner, but you're not getting any swing states or red states signing on to that.
We just hit like 390 concurrent viewers. I think that's our record, Dad.
Always good to set records, but, you know, I'm so happy. As you know, I take all the questions, but, you know, join. It's less than a milkshake for a month. Donate. Become a subscriber.
How many people are going out and just buying a milkshake? You'll say that, like, usually you go get like fries and a milkshake, you get a hamburger. Like, who's just going straight to the milkshake?
I do.
There you go.
But then again, you said I'm obsolete.
Right. What presidents before 1860 were charismatic or heroes? Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, anyone else?
Nope.
Nope.
I think you got it before 1860. And you know, Jefferson is not clear. He's sort of charismatic in retrospect. He was actually a very shy and retiring president. And he wasn't a war hero. He wasn't involved militarily in the revolution. And he thought he was the president who stopped delivering in person the State of the Union because he thought it was unseemly. Almost no one saw or heard Thomas Jefferson.
I think we should go back to that, actually. I like
Just
that
having
idea.
it in writing.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Yeah.
I think we
And
should go
then
back to
they
that.
could have like basketball games on the prime time instead of the State of the Union.
I'm all for that.
Yeah. So, Sam, I got a question for you.
What?
Yeah, you ready?
I guess.
We got the football draft soon. Who's going to be the first pick?
Caleb Williams.
Not Sam Lichtman.
I'm past my prime.
All right. Go ahead. We're getting close. We'll take a few more questions.
With the GOP response to the FSK bridge and Trump's past comments about Baltimore, do you think that could hurt Hogan and help David Trone, who is also popular?
They could, yeah. The thing about David Trone, he has unlimited money. You know, he's 100 millionaire plus. And Hogan might have some trouble getting money. You know, the GOP generally has had difficulty in amassing funds. So, yeah, if I were Trone, assuming Trone's going to win, he's got some strong competition, but assuming Mr. Moneybags wins, I would wrap Hogan as much as I can in Donald Trump. Here's the thing. Hogan's views matter zero. I don't care how moderate he is, how much influence is he going to have as a moderate backbencher in the Republican caucus if he's elected to the Senate?
Very little.
Right, essentially zero. How does he matter in that he could be the swing vote, turning the majority in the Senate to the Republicans? And that would be enormously significant because they're going to pass, assuming Biden wins, they're going to pass on all of Biden's appointments, including judges. And if Biden loses, they're going to rubber stamp all of Trump's appointments. So forget any moderation on the part of Hogan. It's irrelevant. He is still going to support the most reactionary conservative elements in the Republican Party because his only importance, assuming it works out that way, would be to give the Republicans the majority in the Senate.
Will the keys ever be available in an audiobook? Also,
I'm not sure they're not. I'll have to look. Would you look into that, Sam?
I'll look into that, folks.
Yeah.
Also, how did Reagan win almost every state in 1980? I always wondered. That's from Darth Vadant.
Yeah, well, you had a perfect storm. I forget how many, but you had way more keys against Jimmy Carter than were necessary to predict his defeat. You know, you had a terrible economy. You had a foreign policy disaster with the Iran hostage crisis. You had midterm losses. You know, he wasn't charismatic. He was up against a charismatic opponent. So there were just so many things against Jimmy Carter. On the other hand, a lot of the polls had Carter ahead or had the election dead even. People forget how many polling failures there were besides the most commonly named one, 1948 and 2016. Polls were way off in 1980.
Megan Frankie asks, how did you come about predicting Trump's impeachment?
I was researching a book on Donald Trump, and I looked carefully at his history, and I saw there were red flags in his history that would lead him to be impeached. Number one, total arrogance, total lack of shame, no control, no self-control. Number two, a completely hostile relationship with the truth. You know, Donald Trump got into Republican politics by mongering the biggest, worst lie in American political history. You know what that was, Sam?
The birther movement from Obama.
There you go. Claiming Barack Obama was an illegitimate president because he was born in Africa, not Hawaii. You know, a total lie. He clung to it for 5 years. That's two. Three, complete disregard of the law. You know, somehow he had managed to worm his way out, but he had no concern for the law. And four, the fact that he always was able to worm his way out of things and never be held accountable. Those and, some other characteristics were what led me to predict he'd be impeached, not a model.
Our good friend Dr. Ash asks.
Say that fast.
That's tough. That's tough to say fast. Using your model, is there a relationship between a late prediction and a close to call election? Too close to call election?
Oh, absolutely. The late predictions have been elections typically that have turned on one key, and that makes them, especially difficult to call. My first call was 1982, April, 2.5 years before the election, calling Ronald Reagan a winner in 1984, because I could only see three keys coming down against him, which is where it ultimately came out. And so I didn't see that as, an election turning on one key, whereas in 1992, the election turned on one key. It was very hard to call. And that key was, remarkably, Ross Perot, the third party key.
All right. We're running out of time, but we still have a couple more questions.
Yeah, we've been going for over an hour. Let's take two more questions.
Okay.
And if I'm going to go over the hour, we want donations and memberships.
Well, these are all donations and memberships that are
awesome.
asking questions.
We love it.
If you put I'm trying to think of how to answer these questions. We'll try to answer
You're
these.
going to answer them.
Well, we'll try to answer them in writing. Um, Chips, thank you, Tulak Horde, for the dollar donation. Chips on 17 asks, would you rather have the DC trial or Florida documents trial go before the election? Does the DC trial have a chance of going before the election?
I think the DC trial, sometimes called the January 6th or the insurrection, the obstruction trial, will go before the election because Supreme Court, I mean, they can do what they want, but pretty much has to make a decision by end of June. And I cannot imagine they're going to say, although who knows, that presidents have absolute immunity for crimes committed. Well, they could hedge it and, delay it further. But assuming they don't delay it further, she's going to give them a couple of months. So that would be July and August, and the trial could still start in September. She wants this trial to go. She is, Judge Chutkan. She is utterly committed. She's kind of the anti-Judge Cannon.
Kevin, your answer to your question would probably be, it depends. How big of an invasion? What does that mean? M Fro 2002 will answer your question in writing.
All right, we're one more question. We could be going
MD,
a long time.
MD, we've answered that question before. I would look back at past episodes. Turk, we've also answered that question before, maybe even in this episode. Actually, let's just ask this M Fro question. How does the economic situation currently compare to the 70s and 80s or pre-globalism?
Oh, you want to ask a simple question,
Yeah,
It's certainly not similar to the 70s. The 70s were marked by something called stagflation, where you had this combination of high inflation and high unemployment. Economic theory said you're supposed to have one or the other. If you have high inflation, you should have low employment. If you have low inflation, you're supposed to have high unemployment. Now we have high inflation, but also very good employment, which is more in line with the traditional model and less inclined with the 70s. I hate to make these comparisons, but I'd say it's more comparable to the 80s than to the 70s, but imperfectly so.
With that, we will wrap it up. I won't be going live tonight, guys. Sometimes I do a live after it. I have a friend who's visiting in town. Actually, two friends, so I have to go entertain them.
You have two friends?
Yes.
Wow, I'm impressed.
Thank you, Tulak, for becoming a member. George will try to answer your question next episode if you want to ask it. Any final thoughts from you, Dad?
Yeah. Hopefully, by our next show, we'll have a trial to talk about.
Oh, yeah, that'll be exciting.
That'll be really exciting. Totally without precedent. Not only has no former president ever been on a criminal trial, but whether former president or not, no major party candidate has ever been in a criminal trial. So we have something we've never seen before in 240 years of U.S. history.
There we go. Stay tuned, folks. It's going to be exciting. Have a good night.
Good night.